Tell us a little bit about your background and your role. I know you're an immigrant
Hmm.
from Chile. You're the daughter of a couple of educators.
Hmm.
So I think your story goes way back, even prior to college at UT, and then on in your professional. But give us the whole
Yeah.
story.
I I know it's so interesting to reflect on it because, as you said, it really does begin with my parents being educators, being teachers, and us living in Chile at the time. My parents ended up getting recruited to become teachers in the US, and that's because they were looking for opportunities to come to the US, which is wild because they had four young kids at the time, me being one of four, and decided to move us, across the world to a place where we didn't know anybody, and so we moved to New Orleans. And in New Orleans, they were both teachers in the same school where the four of us were students. So it was interesting that the six of us were all literally in the same school, going to school, together every day. Um, and that was an interesting experience because New Orleans was not like what we had seen or expected from the United States. And I'm talking about like the white picket fences and like, kids playing in the neighborhoods and just like what Hollywood was showing about what America was. And so, my I as a young kid didn't realize it then. I mean, maybe I recognized, oh, this is an interesting neighborhood. Like we just lived in a poor area in New Orleans too, in underfunded schools and all of that. So it was like, well, crap, what did we do? For my parents, do we go back to Chile? Like, what are we gonna do? And my mom ended up getting recruited to then work at a school in Dallas, and it was like the complete polar opposite of our experience in New Orleans because she was working at just like this amazing private school that had all the resources that a school could offer to its students. And so we all, of course, followed her and came to Dallas. And when I think about me being in my role now at March to the Polls, I do think it begins then because I experienced being a student in Chile at a private school. I guess it's kind of like a charter school model. And that was, I mean, that was the choice. If you wanted to go to a good school in Chile, like that's what you had to do. Then we went to New Orleans, totally different school experience that, as an adult, I can reflect and realize the differences. Dallas, another total different experience as a public school student in Dallas. Things were a lot better in the sense that, we weren't living in poverty. Like we had more opportunities. The schools were really nice and we had the resources that we needed. And then eventually, when I went to college, I don't know that I necessarily wanted to be a teacher, but I learned about, the educational opportunities and like the gaps depending on where you lived. And, that whole story that I think it's not a story, it's real, that we all learn about now and know that, just depending on your community and, it impacts the school and the quality of your experience there. And so, anyway, all that being said, I learned about that in college and said, hey, that's what I lived. Like, I went to all these different kinds of schools, and that doesn't make sense. And why is it like that? And so I decided to go into teaching, like my parents had, and I became a teacher and was in two different schools when I first started. My very first school was terrible. And I didn't know it because I thought I signed up to like go help change the world. But then when I went to a separate school that was literally a mile like across a river, but a mile away, same demographic of students, the school was amazing. And I said, why is this the case? Now, not only as a student, but as a professional starting my career, I was noticing these differences. I think that's when I decided to learn about, the things that were available to me and as a result available to my students. And I got engaged as like a teacher advocate in different advocacy groups. And I learned about the union in New York and ended up running to be a union representative at my school. And then when I came to Dallas, I was in New York for 6 years. When I came back to Dallas, it was the school board, and I started volunteering for campaigns with the school board. And eventually that became what I did full time. Was I led a school board nonprofit, and March the Polls was the thing that I did as a volunteer because I missed being a teacher. So I wanted to be in the classroom talking to students. I would go visit them and talk to them about voting and why it's so important, etc. And even as like I wasn't eligible to vote until I was 28 years old. So I also appreciate telling people like voting is one way, and that is what we're here to talk to you about, but there's lots of other ways to be involved, and I don't want you to feel like you're not a part of this conversation just because you're not an eligible voter. In fact, I don't like the thing that people say all the time, which is, if you don't vote, you can't complain. I could never buy into that because like you can. There's tons of different ways to engage if you're not a voter. I don't want people to again feel excluded from that process. But that's what led me to march the polls. I volunteered so much that eventually they decided, all right, maybe we should hire you to do this work. So that's kind of I think long version of what led me to the work.
From all of those perspectives, as a teacher, as a volunteer, as an advocate, and now as a nonprofit leader, does I know you probably could give me 20 answers to this, but do you think those disparities are largely down to governance issues, or is it a combination of governance, resources, what role families are able to play? What would you chalk up as probably the two or three biggest contributing factors to that dynamic of the schools a mile apart? Because I think every city, I think Charlotte has schools like that too. What would you say contributes to that the most?
Yeah, in one word, I do think it's governance. And it kind of, you asking that question honestly makes me sad because I think about just like housing, that is governed by an elected body. And then you think about schools, that is governed by an elected body. Like just so many things in your life that, sure, like I can realize that now as a new parent, like what a big factor family plays and having the support of your family. But there's only so much that you can do, that there's going to be things that impact the rest of your livelihood. I mean, I think you're exactly right. And listing that as the first option, for this question, that I do think it's governance. And I wonder if that'll change down the line, but that is my answer right now.